Are you guys good afternoon or morning time or nighttime, depending on where you are in the world? It's your boy, the fiscal intellect here, and we're going to be reacting to a video by Second Thought, and it's called "The End of Capitalism is Here." Let's go ahead and see what he has to say, and let him take it from there.
Yo, I've got some really good news. It's finally happening. Global capitalism is fracturing. Now, that isn't coming from me. It isn't some old quote from Mao's Little Red Book. It's coming from Larry Fink, billionaire CEO of one of the world's largest investment companies, Blackrock.
Blackrock.
They're pretty much running everything.
Is Blackrock evil?
This is one of those companies that is a juggernaut.
A company that manages trillions of dollars of assets, has clients in over 100 countries, and together with its clones, Vanguard and State Street, owns roughly 20% of any given company in the S&P 500. If anybody should be worried about capitalism being over, it's not you and me, it's this guy. And he's worried. But before we celebrate, is he even right? Well, for one, he's not alone. A lot of big, important capitalists have already been sounding the alarm for a while. In 2023, the CEO of the French investment bank Société Générale was saying basically the same thing. And every year since, we've lurched from one disaster to another as this whole thing seems to barely stay afloat. Massive inflation, a year of never-ending layoffs, and now a global trade war and bombing in the Middle East that have put World War III back on the table right as we're...
I mean, guys, look, this is crazy because, like, just imagine, right? Your landlord is telling you that the market is unsustainable, and you're like, bro, like you are the market. Like BlackRock, you're telling us that the market is unsustainable, and you create the market yourself. You vested trillions of dollars into the market, into other assets and stuff like that, diversified assets. And you have a large market cap. You have a lot of control over these companies that you have, again, money invested into. And you're telling us that the market is unstable? It's something that you guys are doing that is making the market unstable.
Being told AI is going to replace everybody. In Larry's 2026 letter to shareholders, he's predicting the end of the same signals. Things are bad, workers are worse off today than they were 40 years ago, AI is gonna get us, it's all crumbling, and we're not even building infrastructure like we used to. And if that wasn't enough, we might soon have a new financial crash on our hands.
And I'm worried about something worse than a recession.
We are headed for a U.S. dollar crisis.
When this thing crashes, okay, it's going to crash. When this thing crashes, it's going to be like mashing up the dot-com thing with the financial crisis because this is so much larger.
Wall Street execs have recently warned that the private credit market's not looking so good. A few bankruptcies and plummeting stock values are starting to snowball and could become the seeds for a new depression. It really seems like capitalism's tearing at the seams because this just can't keep going on.
Nope.
Or maybe it can. If history's any guide, there's just centuries like this where nothing changes, it all keeps getting worse, and we all suffer. So to know if any of this will kill the beast, we need to think about capitalism much, much more deeply than simply pointing to things going wrong. We can't just do Finkist slopulism. Let's start with the basics. What are we even talking about when we say the end of capitalism? Capitalism is a system that guarantees the existence of the rich in a world where the poor outnumber them but need to work for them in order to live. That was about the shortest one-sentence definition I could come up with. It's pretty vague, but it gets to the point. This is what capitalism is about, and that's how it works. For it to end, these things have to no longer be true.
Look, guys, if you think about it, right? Like, nobody our age got the deal that was advertised, right? Like, we weren't guaranteed the work hard, buy a house, and retire comfy type of lifestyle. We weren't guaranteed that. We were guaranteed that we weren't going to have Social Security. We were guaranteed that we're going to have inflation. We're guaranteed that we're going to have a crashing housing market. That basically you can't afford to buy a home. Currently, there are more sellers than there are buyers, right? At the end of the day, we didn't get that type of option that was advertised to the boomers. We just got the foot of the bill. That is what it is.
There's very little risk of that right now. So let's get a better, longer definition that gets progressively more complicated and accurate as we go, so we can refine our analysis a little. Capitalism is a political, social, financial, and economic order that began sometime in the 16th, maybe 17th century. What makes capitalism capitalism is the way that this order is organized around a specific set of rules and conventions, the most important of which are the right to private property and the imperative use of that right to make a profit. For example, by hiring those who don't have private property to produce commodities and paying them less than the revenue that their work generates. Or by trading debt as money with the confidence that states and central banks will protect the value of those assets in times of liquidity crises, periodically rolling over the moment that the market ceases to exist so that capitalists can continue to transact. In other words, capitalism is a collection of strategies for the elite to stay the elite indefinitely, a status that is based on unequal access to and power over the resources necessary for human life and commerce. So this is a pretty theoretical definition. No society is ever completely 100% sticking to these rules at every single level of human interaction, whether it's the US, China, Brazil, Russia, South Africa. Every one of these countries has a blend of capitalist and socialist, even feudal conventions overlapping with one another.
That is correct.
But in this era of global capitalism, at the end of the day, the biggest decisions boil down to what generates profit for an elite class of businessmen. And for the last century, at least, we've been predicting the end of that. To give you an idea, the term late-stage capitalism has been around for over 100 years.
Over a century.
100 years later, we're still waiting for that to mean we're getting close. Because every time it runs into a crisis, capitalism hasn't died.
Werner Thomberg is the one
It's
who
mostly just been
popularized
tweaked.
the earnest model.
Take the biggest tweak we've ever seen. After capitalism went through its greatest liquidity crisis in 1929, the stock market crashed and the world went into a 10-year depression. High unemployment, poverty, a nearly 50% cut in production, and price deflation, meaning wages taking a huge hit.
Okay, look, entire generations came into the labor market like unable to reach the wealth that their parents amassed. And this is measurably true. We didn't enter the job market like we entered a crater where good jobs used to be. And that sucks, man. You know, like it's basically like, you know, you have market there, but there aren't any good jobs. You know, the jobs that you are obtaining can't even help you pay for your first month rent. And so now you have to get a second job in order to subsidize for what that job can help you out with. And now you're stressed. You know, so it's like, it's a cycle, you know, it's a cycle. And in capitalism, we can attribute capitalism to that, you know, at its finest. That is what it is.
Thousands of banks went out of business, millions of people were suddenly living through much scarier times, and all immediately following the peak of robber baron fortunes. If there was ever a moment where you could say that capitalism should have ended, it was then. But it didn't. It was tweaked. Keynesian economics took over as the new governing model of capitalism. The primary imperative, keeping the elite as the elite, didn't go away. But now their status was conditional on new things.
Now we get to see what's actually transpiring now in the present. There's a polarization between two parties or whatever parties of people, right? And what people get confused by is that like, they're like, oh, well, I'm Republican, I'm Democrat. Well, no. In America, it's called class. We live in a classism society now. So basically, it's either you're rich, middle class, or you're poor. And that middle class is slowly but surely dwindling away. And you're going to have this stark difference between the wealthy and the poor. And again, we can attribute capitalism to that.
Full employment. This is where the New Deal, the welfare state, the Fordist production model all came into being. And
to point, I'm not against capitalism. I benefit from capitalism, but there are things that you have to point out that are negative about capitalism for the sake of being a human being.
Brought capitalism back from the brink all the way up until the 1970s. Capitalism was saved by disciplining the elite, not challenging their status. But that very thing ultimately became the source of a new crisis. 40 years of wage growth became just too much for capitalists who were making profits, just not faster than workers were getting better off. From the late 70s on, then, capitalists revolted. Capitalism was going to need to get much leaner for workers. And this new era was kicked off with the Volcker shock. A 20% hike in interest rates by the Fed that skyrocketed unemployment and simultaneously set up the US to elect Reagan, the UK to elect Thatcher, and Germany to elect Helmut Kohl. Even countries where socialists were in power, like France, suddenly found themselves forced to change their economic policy drastically. Volcker reminded the world that as long as it's capitalism, the imperative of keeping the rich wealthy doesn't go away. And this time, it would survive on the condition of cheap consumer goods. Neoliberalism was the new name of the game. The welfare state was shuttered, the average job started to pay less, unions got crushed, everyone started needing crazy debt to get by, and to offset everything else getting worse, the new social contract was held together by cheap TVs and shirts for $1. But this, predictably, led to another crisis. You can't have wages decline so much that people's basic necessities depend on taking on huge amounts of
Exactly.
debt.
And this is where Nixon comes into play, right? We love the relationship that we have with China. We love that we're able to make cheap goods, right, for lower cost. But the thing is that you then export those jobs and manufacturing jobs outside of the US to manufacture cheap goods at a lower cost, a fraction of the cost that it costs to make those goods here in America. But the thing is that, again, you're taking those jobs out of your country to make cheaper goods so that your country can now consume. So now we have not been the manufacturing powerhouse like we used to be during World War I, World War II, because of, again, laziness and then people just exporting, or companies exporting jobs and labor to other countries outside of America. And this is the America First approach that needs to be attacked. There are jobs and manufacturing jobs that need to be back here in America, period. No matter if you're a Republican or Democrat fighting for that part, I think that at the end of the day, we can all agree that jobs need to be back here in America, and we need to make sure that citizens are able to live off the wages that they earn. If you're not able to live off the wages that you earn, you have AI, you have this coupled with AI, you have this coupled with inflation, you have this coupled with potential, private credit market crash. That's a recipe for disaster. The magnitude we haven't seen since 2008 crisis. This is like 1929 and 2008 combined. It's something that needs to change, and it has to change fast. And if it doesn't change fast in a hurry, it's going to be very detrimental to America and also our financial markets as well too globally. Countries run out the US dollar as a reserve currency. That's a fact. That's a fact.
Forever.
The housing market collapse created one financial crisis after another.
The signs were everywhere, but now it's official. We are in a recession.
Major financial institutions have teetered on the edge of collapse, and some have failed.
2008 was another one of those moments where it really felt like this whole thing was cooked. Neoliberalism had pushed global finance to chase extreme levels of debt at the same time as wages took a nosedive.
Wow.
Once banks realized the system didn't have the liquidity they thought it did, the crisis started bouncing from one part of the economy to another until the central banks stepped in. They brought the bank's securities onto their own balance sheets, bailing out the banks and leaving the rest of us to absorb the costs. Houses got foreclosed on, jobs disappeared that never came back, and entire generations have now come into the labor market completely unable to match the wealth of their parents and their parents before them. And now that we've been in this situation for a couple decades, what do the elites suggest as a solution?
Let's hear Larry
A
Fink.
new tweak. On the global stage, the US is starting to pull out of the global exchange and production system and switching to a growth strategy that depends on inflation and price shocks. Wars are exploding all over the world with the chief objective of making oil costs skyrocket, increasing the sale of American weapons, and bringing up prices for everything else without any hope of them going down after the oil shocks pass. That's on the policy side. Let's go back to Fink's letter for a second. In the face of all the problems he lists, Larry gives us his own solution. Just invest.
Larry.
He says it himself. In the
You know what's
last 30 years,
crazy? That's not a bad idea. Just invest, but you can't tell a person with $40,000 in student loan debt and $1,800 a month in rent to just invest. I mean, where the hell they're going to get the money from? You're drowning in debt with high ass interest, probably so, and then you got to pay $1,800 just to make sure you can lay your head somewhere. Where are you going to have the money to invest? Where are you going to find the money to invest? You're telling a person who's drowning to just go buy a boat. They're currently drowning. They can't buy a boat. They're dead. Again, you can attribute that to capitalism.
wages aren't growing as fast as returns on the stock market. A dollar in the S&P 500 grew 15 times faster than that same dollar as a median wage.
Yep.
So Larry's advice is, why not just hitch a ride on the one thing that's going up? Well, you can probably think of why without me having to tell you. In a country where 1 in 4 people live paycheck to paycheck and millions are dealing with huge student loan debt, having money to put aside in savings, let alone financial investments, is just not something that's within reach for a lot of people.
See?
Those who are most directly targeted by the violence of capitalism are the ones with the least flexibility to do things Larry's way. Which, I don't have to tell you either, he's only suggesting because it just so happens to be the solution that lines his pockets. The head of an investment company currently trying to get younger generations stoked about investing on TikTok obviously doesn't want that for altruistic reasons. But beyond the practical reasons why this is BS, advice like this reads more like a confession to me. Did you know that 62% of Americans have money in the stock market? And honestly, that's not a bad thing. You should have some kind of retirement fund or something. But anyway, stats like these make it seem like a majority of us have something to gain from economic growth. Except, about 90% of all stocks are held by just the top 10% of investors. Worse even, the top 1% own about half, meaning that when the stock market grows, when the economy is doing well, it's really only benefiting the top 10%. And it's specifically doing that at the expense of the 90% that are left. The little money we can get from our investments is a cover for the fact that that money is coming out of our wages. Between 2018 and 2022, after Trump's tax cuts, corporate profits exploded, and instead of putting that money into raising wages or doing R&D, billions went to stock buybacks and dividends. And when Time magazine looked at some of these numbers, they found that the biggest offenders not only gave more money to their shareholders, they siphoned off more money from consumers by raising prices. Pepsi laid off hundreds and raised prices by double-digit percentages 8 quarters straight. Comcast rates went up and they fired 3,000 people. United Healthcare increased claim denials 800% and gave their investors $15 billion in buybacks. The whole just invest strategy isn't a solution. It isn't going to make capitalism work for more people. It's a cover for capitalism to continue doing what it's built to do: exploit the poor, enrich the elite, and keep that cycle going forever. When Fink says capitalism is fracturing, what he really means is that he and his buddies are giving away the game. And he would really like it if capitalist countries would realize they're getting cocky. He would much rather they get people to invest a little more and make a little bit of money so that the bigger problems, no jobs, no healthcare, no roads, don't seem as bad, even as he and his private equity friends keep making them worse, with the added bonus that he would manage some of these investments. At the end of the day, you can't reform your way out of this. There is no capitalism without the enrichment of the elite at our expense, by its very definition. So, either you negotiate for more crumbs on their terms, or we finally get smart and say, no, I think we're done now. And we break the wheel that keeps this system crushing 99% of humanity.
That was a very interesting video. I learned a lot through that video. Second Thought never fails to amaze me with their analysis and on certain topics, especially in regards to finance. Other than that, if you guys have any comments, make sure you put them down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe on the video. And other than that, you guys have a great afternoon. The Fiscal Intellect is out.